Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Okay, I've been thinking about this list for a little while, but I'm going to present my top 5 video games that are currently stranded on what I would consider dead consoles. July 28th, as I'm recording this in July 2024, the 28th is the last day to purchase games on the digital storefront of the Xbox 360. And that's significant because a number of them are not backwards compatible. They do not carry forward to be playable on the Xbox One or the Series X/S. And so this topic has been on my mind. I'm trying to think. I think I only have one game on here that could be purchased as a part of that sale. That's the last one that I will be getting to. The rest of that are either on an earlier console or one of them is only available physically and has been for years on the Xbox 360. But we're seeing this happen with a lot of games, and I wanted to give my top 5, not in any particular order, but the games I think of like, man, why has backwards compatibility not happened for these yet? Well, I know why in many cases, but it's because they're not popular enough or whatever. There's licensing deals. Anyway, let's get into it. The first one from the PlayStation 2, Champions of Norath. This is possibly the most baffling of the games on this list. I'll say why in a second. It has a sweet spot in my heart for a couple of reasons. One, it was one of the first Diablo-style games that I ever played, and found when I really tried out other actual Diablo games at some point later on that I preferred this one. Why? Well, I think it's because starting with Diablo 3, technology allowed more enemies to be on the screen at once, and I feel like this genre became almost a real-time strategy genre because they would just have swarming enemies, and you're not killing one enemy at a time. Once you get past the halfway point in this game, in these types of games, you're often killing swaths of them at a time, crowds at a time, and that gets too zoomed out and abstract. I like my enemies to at least be a little bit more meaningful as opponents. And so the technology, I suspect, is what made that the case in this type of game during this time, and really enjoyed Champions of Norath. I played it through with my wife from beginning to end. That's the only game we ever played together. That was before we had kids, and so there was more time and interest on her part, or willingness on her part, to play all the way through it, and we have very fond memories of doing that. I played it through multiple times myself, and yeah, it's got some great classes, that D&D vibe. It's based on the what do you call it? Not the World of Warcraft, EverQuest. It's based on the world of EverQuest, which I never played that online game, but you've got a fighter class, ranger class, cleric class, sorcerer class, some kind of like a necromancer class, some really nice class variety and race variety, male and female characters you can play as. Got great loot and skill upgrading going on throughout the game. Yeah, the reason I'm baffled about this one is it's a first-party Sony game. And it was good enough, or it received well enough, I should say, to get a sequel. So clearly there was, at one time, this was considered a success. Certainly enough to get a sequel. And there are successful games that never get sequels, but this one was not just a success, but good enough to get a sequel. Why is this not? There's clearly an audience that would still be alive and still be interested in this. Yes, they put the Baldur's Gate games, Dark Alliance games up there, but they're paying the Dungeons and Dragons license for that. That seems like a more complicated thing to get up there. Why not Champions of Norath? I have no idea. So it's been all the more disappointing to not see this one carried onto new consoles. I suppose it could still happen, but compared to Xbox, Sony just does not seem interested in doing backwards compatibility related endeavors. So sad. The second game on my list, oh man, this is an old favorite, Shadow Hearts for the PlayStation 2. I made some videos about this a long time ago. They were some of the first videos that I made for the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel, but you can go and check them out. Just search for Shadow Hearts on the channel. This is it takes place in an alternate history. Is it America or London? I think the first one's in London. Early 1900s, fantasy, but dark and Lovecraftian. And it's a turn-based JRPG, but before, voice acting was really prevalent, and so thankfully none of the stereotypical anime voice acting that gets on my nerves so much was a part of this game, or very little if there was any, maybe during some CG cutscenes, but generally you're reading the text. I can make it sound much better in my head that way. The Judgment Ring system, though, is a major standout here. Yes, it's turn-based, but when it's time to execute on the action you've chosen, a disc appears and a hand spins around like it's on like an old classic spinner game that you would play, like little family games. So that spinner flies around, and then there are these wedges that make up portions of the disc, and you need to hit the X button as that spinner is passing through that wedge. And if it lands there, it will be successful. If it doesn't, it won't. Usually it's pretty easy to get it within that wedge. However, you can press your luck even more because a small portion of that wedge at the very edge of it is red, and if you get the spinner to stop in that red zone, you'll basically do like a critical hit, extra damage. And so even though it's turn-based, there's a real sense of engagement at this time. And these days, I would prefer that the engagement be because the animations are short and snappy and maybe spectacular and cool looking, but short and snappy at the same time. This game was still doing some of the more longer spell animations and stuff now and then, but the way they really kept you engaged was having this action input element system, which at first I was very nervous about, but very quickly I was like, this is really cool. The music is dark, industrial, electronic with Eastern influences. It's really of its time, the early to mid 2000s, and I miss that type of music is not as prevalent, moved on to much more club and standard, electronic sounds that really dominated after that. But so I really like the vibe of this music from that time. The monster designs, man, they are disturbing and messed up, with monsters that are in a permanently backs broken, dangling half off of their torso type of configuration and faces on the backs of their heads. It's like really... It's really twisted stuff. Let's see what else. There are 2 sequels to this game. The second one, I think, is the only one worth playing, but the first really stands on its own and is the better of the 2, I think. It's way overpriced on Amazon. It needs up-resing. And all of these games, I don't just want them to be available on the PS2 anyway. And I want them to be up-resed, and I want them available on something that's, going to keep it around for at least a couple decades more. Penny Blood is a spiritual successor coming supposedly in 2025 from many of the original developers of Shadow Hearts, including the head of that studio. But who knows how that's going to turn out? Who knows if it's going to scratch the same itch for me? So it is a bummer when I think about the fact that Shadow Hearts is stranded on the PlayStation 2. These are games that aren't available on PC either. Otherwise, that would be an easy out. Just play them on PC. Nope. None of these games are playable, as far as I know, as far as I can tell anywhere, on PC. Okay, I double-checked. My last game on this list is available on Steam, but really the way I want to play these games is on console. Let's see here. Next up, Justice League Heroes. This is, sadly on the PlayStation 2. You can find it some other places as well. PSP. There's a Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS version, or maybe 2 different versions, but those are really different games. They're just very similar in theme and concept and stuff, but they're significantly different. Justice League Heroes, man, this is one of my favorite games of all time, I think. It's made by Snowblind Studios, who produced Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and the previously mentioned Champions of Norath. This was made, I think, at the peak of their ability to develop these types of games, which is also a Diablo-style top-down isometric action RPG. And it was also a game released at a peak, I should say, a peak time of my DC comic book fandom, celebrating characters that never get the spotlight, and others that, of course, many DC fans love. The main roster: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash. Not really any video games featuring him before this that I can think of. Well, I guess there was the Game Boy one, but anyway. Green Lantern, my all-time favorite superhero concept, really got some great shine and some great abilities in this game. Martian Manhunter, Zatanna, Hawkgirl, Aquaman, Green Arrow, Huntress, Kyle Rayner, Hal Jordan, Green Lanterns as well. If you're playing on the PSP, you also have available Supergirl and Black Canary. And there's also unlockable costumes reflecting big stories of the time, alternate costumes reflecting major things characters were going through, and also alternate characters like Jay Garrick. That was just a skin that you could put on your Wally West Flash, but even so, if you want to feel like you're playing Jay Garrick, you can put on the Jay Garrick costume. power sets for each of the characters was very appropriate, and a really nice variety of powers, both ranged, close up. Right away, characters can fly. If they can fly or glide in comics, you don't have to unlock that later on. They found a nice balance between. I mean, it's always difficult to put these characters into video games that have any kind of like power development system, because in the comics they just have the powers they have that you would want those powers right away. Well, right from the beginning, you can play these characters the way you would want to play them. It's just a matter of how do you want to build them out? What things do you want them to really focus on and be really strong in? That's kind of what you're building up over time. So you can really have your play style met in the way you build even Superman. If you want him to be largely a ranged attacker, you can really pump points into his heat vision and go that route. The voice acting and the dialogue can be kind of cheesy in this game, but I think it's overcome by the strong track record of Snowblind being brought to bear in this type of game at this point. I think it's the last game of this type that they made. I have played through this game twice, and you can carry over your save to a higher difficulty, and so it's almost like having kind of a new game plus already built in. I have a save that's halfway through, I think, maybe the toughest difficulty, so I still haven't squeezed all I can out of this game. But my PlayStation 2 is getting more temperamental, and the connection and the ability to reliably get a signal to my HD TV is getting a little less reliable all the time. So it is just a matter of time before I lose my ability to play one of my all-time favorite games. It is available on PSP, and so I can play it on my Vita. I've purchased it that way. Unfortunately, that doesn't translate to the PlayStation TV. That's very disappointing. Maybe I'll look and see if there's some kind of a hack that will allow me to do that. My PlayStation TV's past its warranty anyway. But I mean, that clock is ticking too. So very sad that Justice League Heroes for the PlayStation 2 is pretty much a relic of the past at this point. Two more to go. Next up is Green Lantern, Rise of the Manhunters. This came out on Xbox 360, and I think maybe on PS3 as well. I couldn't find it on the Steam store, so it doesn't seem to be available. But it's also not available digitally on the Xbox 360 store, and I think that probably has everything to do with it being a licensed game, not just a comic book license, but it's a licensed tie-in for the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie. Now you might be saying, "Oh, I hated that movie. Why would I want to play this game?" Okay, hold your horses. Hold your horses. I mean, I can see some major faults in that movie too. It's been a long time since I've watched it. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again. But if you just like Green Lantern, this game is a different animal. Yes, it does technically act as a pseudo-sequel to the events of that movie, but you can enter into this and just treat it like a Green Lantern video game that takes place early in Hal Jordan's career. It doesn't have his origin story, but he's still like teamed up with Sinestro and being kind of trained by Sinestro. And it happens to be voiced by a very well-known and these days very loved and celebrated actor in Ryan Reynolds, who's really taken off in popularity with Deadpool and all that kind of stuff. And his take on Hal Jordan in this game is much more straightforward and serious than the numerous attempted jokes in the Green Lantern movie. So I think if you just divorce this game mentally from the movie, you can really see it glass half full. Hey, this is a cool Green Lantern game, and it's voiced by a big Hollywood star who treats it seriously, Now, beyond all that, what about the game itself? Well, it's based on the tried and true classic God of War gameplay. At the time, as you can imagine, it was criticized for that. It's like, oh, it's derivative of God of War, da-da-da-da. There's, and people were getting tired of God of War, I guess. But I mean, now, if you've never played this game before, or even if you were just to revisit it, yeah, sure, it was derivative at the time, but it was still solid gameplay, and still cool now, and would be considered a welcome throwback to go back to that style of gameplay, I think, in many ways, if a new game came out that was called Green Lantern today. There's a great variety in the ring constructs that you can make. I probably will not be able to show game footage in the video version of this that really reflects that, but really nice variety there. There are some mild puzzles and some flying levels that were certainly not my favorite parts of the game, but not like overly problematic. It's just a great adaptation of this character to the video game medium, And it's a freaking Green Lantern game, not just a game in which Green Lantern appears and is a playable character. It is about Green Lantern. It's got a skill tree that develops to fill up that whole game. I mean, like, he is a substantive character to play as in terms of his combat abilities, what you can develop, all the different things that you can do. I mean, it's like, my gosh. It's no longer cheap on Amazon, so it's maybe about $40, I think I last saw, but, who knows where that price will go. I think there was just one in stock. But I think this game would likely be worth it for Green Lantern fans that still have a working Xbox 360 and like that classic God of War gameplay. I certainly find it less punishing and less difficult than any of those God of War games that I played. I guess I only played the first two. But anyway, yeah, I think Green Lantern Rise of the Manhunters is sadly overlooked and will be sadly missed, I think, when I'm no longer able to play it anymore. Finally, Singularity on the Xbox 360. This is the one I do have to correct my earlier statement. It is available on Steam, I think, for $10. But I mean, I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with PC gaming and all the troubleshooting and stuff that's involved with that. For a person like me who does not know tech, I want the console experience, and for that, you have to play it on Xbox 360. Very sadly, this game is a clone of BioShock. So, like the Green Lantern game, it was, I think, criticized at the time for like, oh, it's a knockoff of BioShock. But hold on a second. Today, all these years later, when there wasn't this huge avalanche of BioShock clones, and we're waiting on games like Judas and the next BioShock game, doesn't a game that's a lot like BioShock sound pretty freaking appealing right about now? So yeah, being a BioShock clone, I think that's a real strength for it today. The story involves a Soviet time experiment that messed up this island that you are investigating after an EMP from the island takes out a spy satellite. So it's modern day, but this thing that went on in Soviet era Russia was happening on this island, crazy experiment. So it's very BioShock in that you are stranded. You're the only survivor of your crew of soldiers or whatever that crash lands on this island. And you have to try and find any other survivors and get off the island. Meanwhile, you're wondering what the crap happened here. It's a wreck. All kinds of weird stuff is going on. Weird monsters are showing up. Crazy time effects are happening. So it's that same vibe from BioShock of technology and experimentation run amok, and leaving just a disaster zone that you are finding your way through, picking up audio logs along the way. It really is such a faithful quote-unquote knockoff that I feel like it could almost exist within the world of BioShock. It's a first-person horror shooter, I guess, with the BioShock gameplay element would be the TMD, the time manipulation device, which is on your left hand as you play, and you are able to manipulate objects by aging them and making them like dissolve so that you can pass through, locked doors or something like that, or you can reconstruct stairwells that have rotted away. You can revert them to their previous time and go up the stairs. There's also, of course, combat applications, slowing down time in the immediate area to avoid projectiles and things like that. I think there's also a way to help hit your targets by using time dilation. Anyway, you're also in some scripted moments going to, like, moving through places at different time periods where things about that environment are very changed. And so it's just a neat concept. I really appreciate the execution. If you like some of what the time stuff that was going on in, say, I think it was Titanfall 2, or is that Parallel Dimension stuff? I can't remember. But I mean, there's elements of Titanfall 2 that remind me of Singularity, and so I think there's maybe some crossover appeal there as well. Now, this game was developed by Raven Software. If you've not heard of them, they are, I think they still exist, but they're mostly creating Call of Duty levels these days. But they're owned by Activision, which was just purchased not long ago by Microsoft and is under the Xbox umbrella now. So, is there a chance that this game could be re-released? I think that there's a greater chance than ever. There was like some mysterious tweets from one of the devs of this game a few years back, one just saying returning to Katorga 12. And there was no explanation beyond that. It's like, what does that mean? We're getting a sequel? We're going to get a remaster? Whatever that return was going to be, it seems like it probably fizzled out and went nowhere. So I think we're starting from scratch at this point if we're hoping for this game or a sequel or anything of it to be available on modern consoles. But, there's a chance, but still, there's no reason immediately to think that that's actually going to turn into anything. So, you do have, if you watch this before the end of July 28th, you have a chance of still nabbing it digitally. It's possibly on sale. I think it was $15 full price there, $10 on Steam if you're okay with playing it that way. But man, this is a game that a lot of people missed, and I think it's a shame. Really appreciate Singularity. Okay, so you might be thinking to yourself, well, this isn't that big of a deal, Pater. What about just emulating this stuff? That's an easy fix. Well, I wince to say this because I've certainly done my share of emulating in the past, but I did some thinking, some studying, some looking up of relevant, I thought, biblical passages, looking into the legal situation a little bit. I do not believe it is God-honoring in almost any situation to emulate games that are no longer available. Are there rare exceptions? Sure, but I think casually when most people talk about it, they're not fitting into those categories. If you're willing to cringe and go on that journey with me, then you can go to the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel and just use the word emulators, and you'll find that 3-part series. I'll try to also put a link to it below the video version of this. But anyway, the real fix, though, I think, is having the right perspective. And I think we can find that perspective in 1 John 2, verses 15 through 17 in the ESV. It says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be reading into this. A lot of people get kind of confused and weirded out by some stuff going on in 1 John. It's not talking about justification. John was writing to people that were already believers, and so when he's talking, what he's largely talking about here is sanctification. In other words, living in line with what God wants for us. And so in those moments when we're loving the world, at that time we've segmented away from ourselves that the love of the Father that he wants us to have and to have for him and for the things that he wants for us. Going on, starting in verse 16, "For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life," sometimes that's translated pride of possessions. So all these things in the world that we want, that we would cling to, that we would pursue, it says, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And then verse 17, "And the world," here's the reality check, "and the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever." Now again, the wording here shouldn't be pressed to be about how we obtain eternal life. That is not the focus here. It's getting at a broader principle. We can latch on to things that are going to be lost, or we can latch on to the will of God and seek the perspective that he wants us to have on life, the things he wants us to value and treasure in life, which will really endure forever, the things that he wants us to focus on and to be about. In other words, if we want true, lasting fulfillment, we need to engage in what God intends for us. It's not that we can't enjoy these other things, but they can't be the things that we are chasing and pursuing and feeling like we need in order to have a happy, fulfilled life. Anything that we pursue to do those kinds of things for our lives is just setting ourselves up for disappointment and frustration. These games were good. I loved these games. I enjoyed them a ton in their time, and in some cases well beyond what would be considered their time. And who knows, I might enjoy them again someday if they're up-resed or represented, made available again in some way. But it's better for me and all of us to focus on God's goodness, God's promises, the plans that he's revealed for us for the future. He is the only healthy and true basis for hope that we'll enjoy anything about life tomorrow and then fully and forever in his kingdom. Anyway, that's all for me. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.